I sat there frozen, watching my late husband's children nod along as the lawyer skipped right past my name in the will. Not a mention, not a line. Just a silent agreement between them that I didn't belong. But then he reached for the second envelope, the one they hadn't seen, and everything shifted. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The parlor smelled like polished wood and lemon oil, the kind of scent that clung to money and memory. Afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, laying bars of gold across the rug. The chairs, 6 of them, heavy oak, curved backs, were all facing one direction, as if the room itself anticipated judgment. I sat alone on the left side, my palms pressed together so tightly my rings dug half-moons into my skin. Across from me, Rachel leaned toward Michael, whispering something behind the cover of her hand. Whatever she said made him smirk, his thumb grazing the edge of his tie like he'd already won. Paul, Edward's lawyer, stood near the mantel with a manila folder held close to his chest. He'd aged in the same brittle way as the furniture, well kept, but tired of holding weight. When he cleared his throat, the sound scraped the air. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice trembling just enough to betray how many times he'd done this. Mr. Whitmore's will is brief, but he was deliberate in his intentions. Rachel crossed her legs, the click of her heel sharp against the hardwood. "Deliberate," she repeated, like a dare. Paul adjusted his glasses. "The estate, including the manor, its contents and all financial assets, will transfer into a family trust managed by—" She didn't even let him finish. "Rachel and Michael Whitmore." I felt the words hit before he confirmed them. Paul's mouth thinned. "Rachel and Michael Whitmore." For a moment, the room seemed to exhale. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. A gust of wind pressed against the windows, and the fire popped like it was reacting for me. Rachel's smile spread slowly, a performance she'd rehearsed for years. "Well," she said, "Father always said we were the practical ones." Michael chuckled under his breath, his gaze sliding to me, testing, taunting. He also said Claire preferred sentiment to sense. I tried to speak but found my voice sitting somewhere deep in my chest, too heavy to lift. My fingers went numb. I'd known this was possible, but hearing it aloud felt like losing him all over again. Paul shuffled his papers, clearly eager to conclude. "There are a few personal items yet to be distributed individually. Mr. Whitmore left sealed envelopes for each of you." He laid them on the small table in front of us, 3 white rectangles, names written in Edward's familiar, deliberate hand. I stared at mine. Claire, ink slightly smudged near the E, as if he'd hesitated mid-stroke. Rachel tore hers open immediately. Michael followed, the sound of ripping paper filling the space between us. I didn't move. Paul's attention flicked toward me. "You don't wish to read it now?" I shook my head. "Not yet." My voice came out steadier than I felt. Rachel's laughter was light, brittle. "Maybe she's afraid it's just a thank you note." I ignored her. But something in the corner of Paul's desk caught my eye. A second envelope. Smaller, its cream paper yellowed at the edges. He'd placed his files over it, but I could still make out the handwriting. Edwards. And unmistakably, my name. My pulse jumped. "Paul," I said carefully. "What's that one?" He glanced down, brows knitting. "Hmm? Oh, just some administrative materials, I believe." He slid a sheet to cover it completely. Too quickly. Rachel noticed. "What is it?" "Nothing that concerns you," Paul said, voice tight. Michael leaned forward. If it concerns the estate, it concerns us. The lawyer's face flushed pink. Mr. Whitmore left contingencies. Instructions I am not authorized to share until... Until what? I asked. He hesitated, eyes meeting mine for the briefest second before darting away. Until a condition is met. The room went quiet again, the kind of quiet that hums. Rachel looked ready to pounce. Michael was already calculating, but I just kept my eyes on that hidden envelope, feeling its weight from across the room. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to a heartbeat that wasn't grief. It was suspicion, sharp and alive. I didn't know what Edward had done, but whatever it wasn't over. Rachel stood first, smoothing the front of her dress with exaggerated calm. "No hard feelings, Claire," she said, lips curving in that sugar-coated way that always made my stomach turn. "You got years of comfort. You can't say he didn't take care of you." Her voice sliced through the quiet. The parlor felt smaller now, the air thicker. Paul busied himself collecting his papers, eyes darting anywhere but at us. Michael rose more slowly, his expression uneven, pride at odds with guilt. "Rachel," he started, but she cut him off with a look. I stood too. The chair leg scraped against the rug, a raw sound that made everyone flinch. "I think we're done here," I said. My throat was tight, but my voice didn't waver. Not this time. Outside, the manor's hallway stretched like a tunnel of ghosts, portraits of ancestors staring down, stern and oil-slicked, judging me for walking away empty-handed. My heels clicked against the marble, echoing back like applause for a performance I hadn't agreed to give. When I stepped out into the late afternoon light, the air felt colder. The gardens were just as I remembered, trimmed to perfection, roses pruned within an inch of life. My father had loved this symmetry. Rachel had inherited it. I had never been able to. By the time I reached my car, my hands were trembling. Not from sadness anymore, but from something harder, denser. A realization was setting in that I had been naive to believe affection could outweigh bloodlines and paperwork. I looked back once at the manor's high windows, the ones Edward used to open on summer mornings. A figure stood behind the glass. Maybe Rachel, maybe just my reflection distorted by the sun. Either way, it didn't matter. I turned the key in the ignition and didn't look again. The drive home blurred into gray highways and red taillights. I didn't cry. The tears had burned themselves out days ago. What replaced them now was a steadiness I didn't recognize. The kind born from loss, the kind that doesn't fade. When night finally pressed against my apartment windows, I sat on the edge of my couch, the unopened envelope in my lap. Edward's handwriting stared up at me. Careful, deliberate, the same as it had always been. My fingers hesitated on the seal. For a moment, I almost didn't want to know, because once I did, there'd be no pretending he'd left me nothing. I tore it open. A small brass key slid into my palm, cool and heavy. Beneath it, a folded note on the same stationery he used for everything. Thick, ivory paper, faint smell of cedar. The handwriting tilted slightly to the right. For when they show you who they are. That was all. No signature, no explanation. Just that sentence, written like a whisper I was meant to hear later. Beneath the note, another paper. A bank statement. My name printed clearly across the top. An account I'd never seen before. My pulse quickened. The balance was modest, but it was mine. His money, set aside deliberately, privately. At the bottom corner, a phone number scrawled in blue ink. I hesitated, staring at it, tracing the digits with my thumb. Edward never did anything without purpose. I picked up my phone and dialed. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, calm but firm. Claire Whitmore? I froze. Yes. This is Laura. The name meant nothing to me, but her tone carried a weight, as if she'd been expecting this call for a long time. How do you know my father? I asked. There was a pause. Not hesitation exactly, but the sound of someone choosing their words with care. He told me you'd need help, she said, and that when you called, it would mean the time had come. The silence that followed felt electric. My fingers tightened around the phone. What time? I asked. Laura exhaled softly. Meet me tomorrow, 10 o'clock. I'll explain everything then. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there in the dark, the phone still pressed to my ear, the key glinting under the lamplight beside me. The note lay open, those 7 words burning into my mind. For when they show you who they are, and somewhere deep down, I knew. Tomorrow, I'd find out exactly what Edward meant. The morning air was brittle, the kind that makes sound travel sharper. I parked beside the marina, watching gulls wheel over the gray water as if they were tracing invisible lines only they understood. Laura had chosen the cafe by the docks, quiet, tucked between a bait shop and a shuttered bookstore. She was already there when I walked in. A woman in her late 50s with steady eyes and a face that carried the kind of calm people mistake for kindness. Claire, she said, standing just enough to shake my hand. Thank you for coming. The coffee between us steamed in mismatched cups. I couldn't stop looking at her hands, thin, capable, not a tremor in sight. You said you knew my father? I began. Laura nodded. I worked with him for 20 years. Estate planning, investments, that sort of thing. She leaned forward slightly. But what we're talking about today wasn't on any ledger. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? She pulled a slim file folder from her tote and slid it across the table. 2 months before he died, Edward asked me to help him draft a private addendum to his will. He said he didn't trust that everything would stay as he intended. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents, typed pages, a few notations in Edward's handwriting. Not a will, exactly, but something close. He wanted to protect you, she said. He was planning to move the manor into your name alone, to keep it outside the trust. But when the paperwork reached Paul's office, it vanished. I stared at her. Vanished? She nodded slowly. The original was destroyed before it was ever filed. A chill threaded through me, though the cafe's heater hummed. You think Paul knew? I think Paul looked the other way, she said quietly. He's been the Whitmores' attorney for decades. His loyalty isn't to the law. It's to whoever keeps him comfortable. My chest tightened. I pictured Paul's nervous eyes, the way he'd covered that extra envelope too quickly. He knew about it, I whispered. He had to. Laura reached into the folder again, drawing out a card. There's one person who can confirm it. Judge Harlan Price. He notarized the addendum himself. He retired years ago, lives in Bayfield now. The name hit me like a memory half buried. My father had spoken of him once, said he was the last man in the county who still believed integrity mattered. Laura slid me an address scribbled on the back of a receipt. If we find him, we find proof this existed. The drive to Bayfield took 2 hours. Laura insisted on coming. She said it was safer that way. As the miles stretched on, I caught myself gripping the brass key in my pocket, the metal warming against my palm like a pulse. When we reached the small white bungalow by the water, Judge Price was already on the porch, as if he'd been expecting company. His hair was silver, his back straight despite the years. "I don't see visitors much these days," he said, leading us inside. The living room smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and salt. But when Laura called, she said it was about Edward Whitmore. That man. I'd always hoped he'd outlive his enemies. I sat forward. "Judge, did you sign an addendum to his will?" His gaze sharpened. "Of course I did. Your father was meticulous. Every clause, every condition. He wasn't confused, Mrs. Whitmore." He paused, then added, "He was careful." The words lodged deep, like a truth I'd been waiting to hear. Laura opened her notebook. "We can't locate the original document. The firm says it never existed." Price frowned. "It existed. I stamped it myself. 2 witnesses. Both legitimate. A week later, your sister came to see me. Rachel, yes? Wanted to verify details." I felt my stomach turn. She what? She said Edward was reconsidering, that I should be prepared to nullify the record if asked. He looked at me gravely. I told her that wasn't how the law worked. The air seemed to thicken around us. My mouth went dry. "She erased me," I whispered. The realization didn't come as shock, but as confirmation. The final puzzle piece sliding into place. Laura's hand brushed mine, steadying but cold. "Then we'll unerase you." But as we left the judge's house, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Engine idling, windows dark. Someone was already watching. The invitation hadn't been meant for me. I saw it by accident. A glossy postcard in the society pages. Rachel's face beneath the headline, "Whitmore Manor hosts benefit for Children's Arts Foundation." My father's charity, the one he'd funded every year without fanfare. Now it was her stage. By 7 o'clock, the manor's windows blazed like a ship at sea. Cars lined the circular drive, laughter spilling out through the open French doors. I stood by the gate for a long moment, the October wind teasing the hem of my dress. It was Edward's favorite. The soft blue silk he'd once said reminded him of calm water after a storm. I hadn't worn it since before the funeral. Tonight, it felt like armor. Inside, everything gleamed brighter than I remembered. Chandeliers polished within an inch of blindness, champagne glasses stacked in pyramids, music lilting in the background like nothing had ever gone wrong. Rachel thrived in this kind of artificial glow. She moved through the crowd as though she'd been born for it. When she saw me, her smile faltered just enough for satisfaction to flicker through me. Then she recovered, all teeth and poise. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said, voice dipped in charm but sharpened at the edges. I met her gaze evenly. "I wouldn't miss my husband's legacy." Her laugh was short, practiced. "Always so sentimental, Claire." She leaned in, the scent of her perfume, jasmine and something colder, brushing my skin. "You should be careful about clinging to ghosts. People might start to think you've lost touch." "I prefer to think I'm holding on to what matters," I said. For a beat, her smile didn't reach her eyes. Then someone called her name from across the room, and she drifted away, light catching on the diamonds at her throat. I turned toward the grand staircase, the one Edward used to descend when he addressed guests. His portrait still hung above the landing. Same confident posture, same half smile that used to make me feel safe. Now, under the chandelier's glare, even his eyes seemed to question me. I felt eyes on me too, whispers trailing in my wake. The fallen wife, the disinherited widow, the woman who didn't know when to stay home. I let them look, let them talk. Every step I took through that crowd was measured, deliberate. I wasn't here to win sympathy. I was here to be seen. Near the bar, Paul the lawyer stood nursing a drink. tie loosened, eyes scanning the floor like a man looking for an exit. His reaction when he spotted me was almost imperceptible. A blink too long, a sip too quick. "Paul," I said softly when I reached him. "Claire." His smile tried for cordial but failed halfway. "I didn't realize." "I imagine you didn't." He glanced around. "This isn't the place." "Relax," I said. "I just came to enjoy the evening." He exhaled, relief thinly disguised. "Then let's keep it pleasant." I nodded, pretending to take a sip of champagne. The music swelled and people began drifting toward the patio for Rachel's speech. Perfect timing. When his attention shifted toward the movement, I slipped the photograph from my clutch. An old black and white of Edward and Paul shaking hands in the study. Written across the bottom in my father's own handwriting. For safekeeping, not secrecy. I slid it into the inner pocket of Paul's coat as I stepped past him. He didn't notice. Not until I brushed his arm. Leaning close enough to whisper, "I know you're lying." He stiffened. The color drained from his face, his glass trembling slightly. I didn't wait for his answer. I walked away before he could form one. From the patio, Rachel's voice floated through the doors, amplified and bright. "Tonight we celebrate renewal. The Whitmore name stands for integrity, tradition, and family." I paused by the doorway, half hidden in shadow, eyes fixed on her. Tradition. Family. Lies dressed as legacy. The crowd applauded, glasses raised high. But across the room, Paul stood motionless, his hand pressed to his pocket, his eyes wide and uncertain. And when Rachel caught sight of him, pale, shaken, her smile flickered again, just for a second. Enough to tell me she knew something was shifting, something she couldn't yet control. The morning after the fundraiser, I woke to my phone vibrating against the nightstand, Laura's name glowing on the screen. For a moment, I just stared at it, the faint ache of too little sleep pulsing behind my eyes. "Claire," she said when I answered, her voice brisk. "I think you'd better come by." Her office was small, tucked behind an insurance agency on Maple Street. When I walked in, she didn't bother with small talk. Her desk was covered in printouts, each one marked with red pen. "What is all this?" I asked. She gestured to the papers. "Financials from your husband's holding company. I pulled records from the last quarter before he passed. There's something you need to see." I leaned over the desk. My name appeared on several documents. Minor transfers, standard disbursements. But one column was different, highlighted in crimson. $2 million, I said quietly. "Transferred to a private fund?" Laura nodded. 2 weeks before Edward died. My heart began to thud in my ears. "Whose fund?" She met my eyes. "Rachel's." For a second the room tilted. "That can't be right." "I double-checked," she said. "The trail's clean, but deliberate. Your husband signed off on the movement. Only, the authorization code used wasn't his usual one. Someone else had access." I backed away, gripping the edge of the chair. The sound of the old wall clock filled the silence. "Laura," I whispered. "He told me something, days before his heart attack." She waited, patient. I could still see it. The study lit only by the fire, Edward's hands shaking as he poured himself a drink he barely touched. "You're hiding money from me?" I had asked then, hurt and disbelief thick in my throat. He'd set down the glass, eyes heavy with a kind of sadness that wasn't meant for me. "I'm protecting it," he'd said. Now, standing in Laura's office with the proof in front of me, I finally understood. He hadn't been protecting it from me. He'd been protecting it for me, from them. Rachel, Michael, even Paul. Laura turned one of the sheets toward me. "This fund Rachel's using, It's tied to a Cayman account that emptied right after Edward's death. Same week the trust was executed. My pulse raced. She took it. She took everything he tried to save. Laura's voice softened. I think Edward suspected she would. That's why he left you the key. Whatever it opens, it's part of what he wanted you to find. I looked down at the brass key in my hand, still warm, worn at the edges where Edward's fingers once held it. My throat tightened. He knew, I said. He knew they'd do this. Laura hesitated, then asked carefully, "What do you want to do with this information?" I stared at the papers spread before me, Rachel's signature looping in arrogant confidence, Paul's stamp beneath it, silent endorsement of betrayal. For the first time since Edward's death, the fog lifted. I saw everything clearly, every slight, every manipulation, every smile that had hidden a knife. They tried to erase me, I said, to rewrite the story so that everything he built would be theirs. Laura's eyes narrowed. Then we rewrite it back. I felt a slow heat rise in my chest. Not rage, exactly, but something sharper, more controlled. No, I said quietly. We don't rewrite it. Laura tilted her head. Then what? We take it apart, piece by piece, legally, publicly, permanently. Her lips curved, just slightly. That's going to take precision. I've learned something from them, I said. They like to play with appearances. Let's give them a show. Outside, the wind howled against the office window, rattling the glass. The sound was low and insistent, like the beginning of a storm. Laura began gathering the papers into a folder, her movements crisp and practiced. Then this is the first step. She slid one page toward me, the summary of the transfers. We'll start with the money, follow the trail, find the account, then make sure the right people see it. I folded the paper and slipped it into my purse beside Edward's note. For when they show you who they are, they had shown me. Now it was my turn. Laura's office printer hummed steadily, spitting out pages that could undo everything Rachel thought she'd secured. The smell of fresh ink filled the air. Each page bore the same header: Petition to contest the will of Edward Whitmore. Allegations of fraud and misrepresentation. I stood by the window, watching the autumn rain smear the glass. You really think this will hold up? I asked. Laura didn't look up from her desk. Fraud isn't hard to prove when arrogance leaves a paper trail, she said. Rachel moved company funds through personal accounts. Paul notarized documents with conflicting dates. You don't need a conspiracy theory when you have math. I almost smiled. Then let's make it official. She gathered the stack, clipped it neatly, and slid it across the desk. Sign here, Claire. My hand didn't shake when I took the pen. The sound of it scratching across paper felt final. The first true move in a game they didn't even know they were playing. The next week, I was everywhere. Not by choice, but because Rachel had started the press circuit. A family matter blown out of proportion, she'd said to the Tribune, her tone perfectly mournful. So when a reporter caught me outside the courthouse, I didn't dodge the question. I smiled, calm and poised beneath the umbrella. I have no interest in drama, I said, just the truth. The quote ran the next morning: Whitmore widow seeks justice, not revenge. It was exactly what I wanted Rachel to read. Privately, though, every minute was war. I combed through boxes of Edward's old files, cross-referencing bank statements, scanning notes in his tight, slanted handwriting. Every discrepancy felt like a breadcrumb leading back to her. At night, Laura called with updates. Paul's firm filed for an extension, she'd say, or Rachel's counsel tried to suppress the Cayman records. Each obstacle only sharpened my focus. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed. Rachel. Her voice came through low, almost purring. You really are persistent, aren't you? $2 million wasn't enough to buy your silence? I didn't take your money, I said evenly. You'll waste what little you have left on lawyers, she said, and when it's over, you'll still be nothing. I let the silence stretch. Then I said softly, not mine, yours. For a second, I could hear her breath catch, a faint crack in the armor. Then the line went dead. The next morning, I sent a package to Whitmore Manor. No return address. Inside, a framed black and white photo of Edward standing by the garden fountain, the last picture taken before his death. On the back, I'd written in looping, deliberate ink, truth always finds its way home. That afternoon, Laura called again. You'll want to see this, she said. A gossip blog had posted a single photo. Rachel in the Manor's parlor, shards of glass glittering at her feet, the broken frame still visible on the table. Her expression was pure fury. Looks like she got your message, Laura said dryly. I didn't reply, but that night I slept soundly for the first time in months. It was Michael I didn't expect. He showed up at my apartment 2 days later. No driver, no pretense. Just standing there in the hallway, rainwater dripping from his coat. Can I come in? He asked. I hesitated before stepping aside. He didn't sit, didn't remove his coat. Rachel said you're trying to destroy the family, he started. I met his gaze. I'm trying to tell the truth. He exhaled, hands flexing. I didn't know about the transfers, I swear. I thought the trust was legitimate. Do you still think that? I asked quietly. He didn't answer, just looked at the floor. She said father was confused near the end, he murmured. But now I'm not so sure. I could see it, the doubt working through him like cracks in porcelain. He lifted his eyes, guilt bleeding into them. If you're right, Claire, you won't stop her with paperwork. I don't plan to, I said. Paper's just the opening act. He stared at me a long moment before turning to leave. When the door closed behind him, I felt something shift in the air. Not relief, not triumph. Just the faint tremor of the trap tightening. Rachel had built her empire on certainty, and certainty was about to become her weakness. The cafe Laura chose was small, tucked on the corner of a quiet street near the university. The kind of place no one from Rachel's world would ever think to enter. The smell of coffee and rain mingled in the air. I sat near the back, watching drops slide down the window, tracing crooked lines across the glass. Michael arrived late, coat collar up, eyes scanning the room like he expected someone to be following him. When he spotted me, he hesitated, then slipped into the seat across from mine. You shouldn't have called me, he said under his breath. I didn't, I replied, stirring my coffee. You called me. He frowned, confused, until I nodded toward the phone on the table. You said you wanted to talk. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. The past week had aged him. Shoulders slumped, tie askew, a man unraveling at the seams. I shouldn't even be here, he muttered. Rachel would. Rachel doesn't control this conversation, I interrupted. You do. He looked up then, meeting my eyes for the first time. There it was, exhaustion, and underneath it, fear. After father died, he began, voice low. Rachel handled everything. She told me what to sign, when to show up, what to say to the lawyers. She said you didn't want anything but sympathy. And you believed her? I said softly. He flinched. She said you only married him for money. For a moment, the air between us went still. I stared at the dark liquid in my cup, then back at him. "You've known me most of your life, Michael. Did that ever feel true?" He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. I reached into my bag and slid an envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of the Cayman transfer receipts. Rachel's signature in bold ink, the timestamp just days before Edward's death. He hesitated before pulling one free. His eyes scanned the numbers, and I watched the color drain from his face. "She said that was investment money," he whispered. "That father approved it." "He didn't," I said. "He tried to protect it from her. From both of you, if I'm being honest. But she got to it first." He sat back, exhaling hard, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. "I don't know what you want me to say. I'm not asking you to say anything." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "I'm asking you to decide who you want to be when this is over." He looked up, confused. "You have a choice," I continued. "Truth or destruction. You can help me expose what she did, or you can keep pretending she's saving you." He shook his head, half in disbelief, half in denial. "If I go against her, she'll destroy me too." "Then maybe it's time she learns you're not hers to destroy," I said. He gave a small, hollow laugh. "You don't know Rachel." "I do," I said. "Better than you think." We sat in silence for a moment, the soft clatter of cups around us filling the space. Outside, the rain had turned to mist, blurring the world into shades of gray. Finally, Michael set the papers down and rubbed his temples. "I don't know how to do this," he murmured. "I don't know how to undo her." "You don't have to," I said. "You just have to stop protecting her." He looked at me, something raw flickering in his eyes, the first glint of conscience breaking through fear. "What happens if I tell the truth?" he asked quietly. "Then she falls," I said. He nodded slowly, the weight of it sinking in. "And if I don't?" I met his gaze. "Then you fall with her." He didn't respond, just sat there, staring at the rain outside like he could already see the wreckage ahead. When he finally stood to leave, he didn't say goodbye. He just gathered the papers, folded them carefully, and slipped them into his coat. As the door closed behind him, a gust of wind swept through, scattering a napkin across the table. I reached for it absently and noticed a single line Michael had scribbled on his receipt before leaving. "She's slipping." I stared at it for a long moment, the faintest spark of satisfaction rising in my chest. The cracks were spreading faster than I'd planned. The headline hit before sunrise. "Widow challenges stepchildren over missing millions." The tabloids loved it, a perfect storm of wealth, betrayal, and grief. My name was suddenly everywhere again, usually beside the words unstable or vengeful. Cameras camped outside my apartment building. By noon, every morning show had an expert dissecting my motives. Rachel's response came swiftly. A statement released through her publicist, dripping with performative concern. "My late father's wife is struggling to process her loss. This is not a legal matter. It's a personal tragedy. We wish her healing and privacy." I read it once, twice, then set the newspaper down. "Healing and privacy," I murmured. "That's rich." Laura, seated across from me, smirked. "She's trying to bury you in sympathy. Don't give her the chance." "I won't," I said. She slid a folder across the table. The claims filed. Fraud, misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty. It's airtight. "Good," I said. "Then we let her talk herself hoarse." And that's exactly what I did. Nothing. No interviews, no statements. The press hounded me for a comment. but I stayed quiet, the way Edward used to when the markets turned volatile. Silence unsettles people more than outrage. By the third day, Rachel's voice dominated every outlet. She appeared on the local news wearing black, face composed in dignified sorrow. "This isn't what my father would have wanted," she said softly. "Claire was like a sister to us. I just hope she finds peace." The host nodded solemnly. The camera zoomed in on her trembling hands. It was flawless theater. That night, Laura called. "She's winning the optics, but not for long. I'm about to drop something she won't be able to spin." "What are you leaking?" I asked. "Just enough," she said. "The Cayman receipts. A few internal memos from Paul's office. Nothing that names her outright. Yet. But it'll plant the seed." By morning, the whispers had shifted. Headlines now read, "Suspicious transfers surface in Whitmore estate." Rachel's team went into overdrive. She posted a photo of herself visiting a children's art center. Same charity she'd paraded at the fundraiser. But the comments beneath the post told a different story. Why was $2 missing from the foundation accounts? So much for integrity, Rachel. The facade was cracking, and this time, I wasn't the one holding the hammer. 2 nights later, Michael called. His voice trembled through the line. "She's furious," he said. "She thinks I talked." "Did you?" I asked. "Not to her, but I'm done pretending." There was a pause, the sound of him exhaling, shaking. "I'll testify. Whatever you need, I'll tell the truth." I closed my eyes. "You're sure?" "She cut me off tonight," he said quietly. "From the trust. From everything. She called me a traitor." The words landed heavier than I expected. "Michael." He gave a humorless laugh. "Guess she's finally showing me who she really is." When the call ended, I sat alone in the dim light of my living room. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, slow and deliberate, as if the sky itself was clearing its throat before a reckoning. The next morning, Laura and I met at her office. She had the day's paper folded under her arm. Across the front page, a grainy photo of Rachel storming out of her attorney's building, jaw tight, eyes cold. "She's panicking," Laura said. "Cutting her brother out of the trust was a mistake. It makes her look vindictive." "It also makes her predictable," I said. "She'll double down now. She always does when she's cornered." Laura studied me, then smiled faintly. "You've learned to think like her." "No," I said, slipping on my coat. "I've learned to think ahead of her." As I left the office, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. No message. Just a single attachment. A photo. Rachel, standing on the manor balcony at night. Phone to her ear, staring straight at the camera. Below it, a single text from an unlisted sender. "She knows you're winning." I stared at the image until the screen dimmed. For the first time, Rachel wasn't the one controlling the narrative. And for the first time, she looked afraid. The news came on a Thursday. Quiet, almost polite in its cruelty. Laura called just after 9. Her voice was clipped, all steel edges. "Paul's flipped." I froze. "What do you mean flipped?" "He's cooperating with Rachel's counsel," she said. "Said he has new evidence regarding the second will." The words landed like a punch. I sat down, staring at the half-empty cup of coffee cooling beside me. "That's impossible. He doesn't even have the original." "That's the problem," Laura said. "They don't need the original. They're claiming you forged the addendum." The silence stretched so long I could hear my own heartbeat. "They're saying what?" "They're saying you created it after Edward's death, that you colluded with me to falsify the documents and defame Rachel." I pressed my hand to my forehead. "That's insane. Price confirmed the notary's seal." Laura cut in. Doesn't matter. Rachel's team filed a motion to challenge the authenticity. Paul testified that you came to him weeks after Edward's passing asking for paperwork. I never, I started, then stopped. My breath caught. The memory hit. The day I went back to his office, asking about the second envelope, the one with my name. They were twisting it, turning every truth into a blade. Laura exhaled. They've submitted a new addendum they claim Edward drafted, conveniently dated the same week as yours. It transfers everything to Rachel, even the charity funds. I closed my eyes. The room seemed to spin, every breath a little shallower than the last. Laura, how could he? Because they offered him protection, she snapped. Rachel's attorneys filed an immunity clause. If he testified against you, he'd be absolved of negligence. He sold us out, I whispered. He sold you out, she corrected. He's still practicing law. You're about to be under investigation for fraud. I heard her papers shuffle, the sound tight and frantic. Claire, listen to me carefully. Until this is cleared, they can freeze your assets. Every account, including the one Edward set up. Something inside me cracked. They're going to take everything. Again. Not if we fight it, Laura said, but her voice had softened, the kind of tone people use when they know you're already falling. By evening, the story was everywhere. Widow under investigation. Fraud allegations shake estate case. My photo, one from years ago, happier days, stared back from every headline. Rachel had issued another statement, her concern now saintly in its restraint. This entire situation breaks my heart. My father loved Claire, but I must protect his legacy from deceit. I turned off the television. The apartment was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sat on the couch, the same place I'd opened Edward's note weeks before, and stared at the brass key on the table. Laura arrived not long after, soaked from the rain, her face drawn tight. She tossed her briefcase on the chair. We'll file a counter motion. I'll get forensic analysts, handwriting experts. Don't, I said softly. She blinked. Claire, you can't just... I said don't. My voice cracked on the second word. They've already won the narrative. If I fight the wrong battle now, I look guilty. Laura's eyes softened. They're trying to break you. They already have. The words slipped out before I could stop them. I pressed a hand to my face, the tears hot, uninvited. They took him from me when he died. Then they took his home, his name, and now they're taking what little truth I had left. Laura sat beside me, silent for a long time. The rain beat harder against the windows. Claire, she said finally, you can't let this be the end. I dropped my hand from my face and looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. Not the old anger, but something colder, steadier. No, I said quietly, it's not the end. Laura frowned. Then what is it? The beginning of something else. I picked up Edward's key from the table, running my thumb over the engraving. Faint initials worn down by time. He'd told me to use it when they show you who they are. And now I knew exactly who they were. I wiped the tears from my face and met Laura's gaze. We're done defending. It's time they start explaining. She studied me, understanding dawning slow but certain. What are you thinking? Something Paul forgot, I said. Lawyers leave traces. Every lie needs a draft. Outside, thunder rolled again, not distant this time, but close enough to rattle the windows. Somewhere deep in my chest, something steadied. They'd taken everything once. This time, I'd take it back. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed pale and glistening. I drove with the brass key on the seat beside me, sunlight glinting off its edges like a quiet heartbeat. The address came back to me as clearly as Edward's voice once had. The old downtown branch. The one he refused to close even after the family trust moved everything to private banks. Some places are worth keeping honest, he used to say. Inside, nothing had changed. The marble floor, the heavy brass teller windows, even the smell, a mix of polish and time. The manager on duty, a man in his 50s with polite, nervous eyes, greeted me by name. Mrs. Whitmore, I wasn't aware you still— I need to access box 317, I said. He blinked. That box was registered under Mr. Edward Whitmore's personal account. I have the key, I said, placing it gently on the counter, and his authorization. Something in my tone must have carried weight, because he didn't argue. He led me to a small, dim vault room lined with numbered compartments, the air cool and faintly metallic. The sound of the tumblers turning echoed like a secret exhaling. When the drawer slid open, my hands trembled. Inside was a single manila envelope, edges yellowed, sealed with wax. Edward's initials pressed into the center. Across the front, in his unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Claire, if they betray you." My breath caught. For a long moment I couldn't move. Then I lifted it carefully and sat at the small table in the corner of the vault. The wax cracked softly as I broke the seal. Inside were 2 items, a flash drive and a letter, written in the same steady script I'd memorized over years of shared mornings. "My Claire," it began. "If you're reading this, they've done what I feared they would. I've recorded what I could, because paper burns and words can be twisted. But a voice carries truth." My hands shook as I unfolded the rest. "You'll know when to use it. Protect what's right, not what's easy." I pressed the flash drive between my palms, the plastic warm from my skin. For a moment, the silence felt unbearable, like standing at the edge of something too big to name. Then I gathered myself and drove straight to Laura's office. She plugged it into her laptop, jaw tight with concentration. The screen flickered, and then Edward's voice filled the room. "Rachel, sit down." The sound hit me like a physical thing. His voice, calm, deliberate, but tinged with the fatigue I'd heard in his last weeks. "You moved money from the foundation," he said. "Father, I was just— Don't insult me. $2 million doesn't move itself. You're gambling with the family name." Rachel's tone rose, brittle. "You'd rather give it to her? The woman you barely knew before you— Enough," he snapped. "If anything happens to me, Rachel, it won't be a mystery who's responsible. It will be you." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Then the faint scrape of a chair, a door closing. The recording ended. Laura's hand covered her mouth. "Jesus, Claire." My chest ached. I hadn't realized the tears were falling until one splashed onto my hand. Edward's voice lingered in the air, alive again for a few seconds that weren't enough. "You knew I'd need this," I whispered. Laura replayed the clip, listening closely. "The metadata's intact," she said, awe creeping into her voice. "Time-stamped, authenticated. This isn't just evidence. It's proof. Paul's forgery won't stand a chance against this." I nodded slowly, wiping my face. The grief was still there, but it had changed shape. Not a wound anymore, but a weapon honed by love. "This changes everything," Laura said, her voice trembling with conviction. I looked at her, then down at the flash drive still glowing faintly in the USB port. "No," I said quietly. "This ends everything." The lights from the city glinted off the window behind us, reflections shifting across the glass like ghosts moving through water. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time, impatient. For the first time since Edward's death, I felt him beside me, not in memory, but in purpose. The truth wasn't buried anymore, it was coming home. It started with 3 envelopes, one for Laura, one for the Herald Tribune, and one, hand-delivered by courier, to the state attorney's office. Each contained the same thing, a USB drive labeled in Edward's handwriting, a single word scrawled across the top: truth. I watched from my apartment window as the courier disappeared down the rain-slicked street, the taillights fading into dawn. It felt less like an action and more like an exhale, years of silence finally releasing their grip. By noon, the first headline broke. Whitmore IRS embezzled father's fortune before his death. Then came the subheading: Exclusive audio reveals confrontation between Edward and daughter Rachel, weeks before fatal heart attack. The article went live at 12:47 p.m. By 12:53, every network was playing the recording. You moved money from the foundation. Father, I was just... Don't insult me. The world heard the same tremor in Edward's voice that I'd carried in my memory, the same brittle calm before his final collapse. Within an hour, Rachel's publicist resigned. Within 2, her foundation's board announced an emergency audit. I didn't celebrate. I just sat on the couch, hands clasped in my lap, watching it unfold like weather I'd known was coming. Laura called first. Her voice was electric. They've confirmed authenticity through independent forensics. The DA's office has opened an investigation. Rachel's counsel withdrew 10 minutes ago. I closed my eyes. Then it's begun. More than that, Laura said. It's over. The next morning, the courthouse steps were a sea of cameras. Reporters shouted questions as I walked up the marble stairs, but their noise barely reached me. The air smelled of rain and flashbulb heat. Rachel arrived 10 minutes later, surrounded by handlers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Her sunglasses couldn't hide the pallor beneath her makeup. She didn't glance at me once. Inside, the courtroom was packed. The press filled every available seat. The sound techs set up recorders along the railing. For all her posturing, Rachel looked small, the kind of small that comes from being seen too clearly. Michael sat near the witness stand, hands folded, face pale but resolute. When he caught my eye, he nodded once. When the judge entered, the room stilled. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began, voice measured, "we have reviewed the newly submitted evidence, including the audio file authenticated by the state attorney's office. The recording clearly establishes that Mr. Edward Whitmore identified misappropriation of funds by his daughter Rachel Whitmore prior to his death." Rachel shifted, her jaw tightening. The judge continued, his gaze unwavering. "Accordingly, the forged addendum presented by counsel for the respondents is declared invalid. The original will, along with its lawful trust, is hereby reinstated. Furthermore, punitive damages are to be levied against Rachel Whitmore and her legal representative, Mr. Paul Weller, for willful fraud and obstruction." The words fell heavy, each one final. Beside me, Laura exhaled softly. "You did it." But I didn't move. I just watched Rachel, who sat frozen, disbelief hollowing her face. She looked at Michael, perhaps for mercy, perhaps for explanation, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. When he took the stand, his voice was steady. "My father warned us both," he said. "I just didn't listen soon enough." The courtroom murmured, cameras clicking like hail. Rachel's shoulders sank, the mask finally breaking. After the ruling, the press surged forward again, questions flying like shrapnel. "Mrs. Whitmore, what will you do now?" Do you forgive them? I paused at the top of the courthouse steps. The flashbulbs flared white against the gray sky. I think, I said softly, the truth has done enough. Laura caught up beside me, her smile small but certain. Edward would be proud. I glanced at the crowd below, the storm of cameras and curiosity. Somewhere in that chaos, I could almost hear his voice again. Not angry, not sad, just steady. Protect what's right, not what's easy. I turned away from the cameras, the courthouse behind me, the brass key warm in my hand. The fight was over, but something deeper had settled in its place. Not victory, not vengeance. Peace. And as I stepped into the sunlight breaking through the clouds, I knew Edward had been right all along. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be heard. By the time the ink dried on the court's ruling, Rachel had disappeared from every social page that once praised her. The headlines had changed tone, no longer scandal, but consequence. Rachel Whitmore sells remaining company shares in settlement deal. I read it without reaction. The photo showed her leaving an office building in dark glasses, her expression blank, the light gone from her posture. Laura called to confirm. She's avoiding prison time. The restitution agreement's massive. Most of it will go straight back into Edward's foundation. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then she finally gave something back. Even if it's not by choice, Laura said. A week later, Michael asked to meet. We chose a small restaurant off the highway, quiet, almost empty. He looked thinner, older somehow, as if the months had aged him years. When he sat down, he didn't speak at first, just pushed a napkin between his hands until it tore in the middle. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said finally, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For believing her. For standing there while she... He broke off, shaking his head. I studied him for a long moment. His eyes were tired but honest, stripped of arrogance. Forgiveness isn't owed, I said quietly. It's earned. He nodded, accepting it like a sentence he'd expected. I'll try, he said, to earn it. When he left, he didn't ask to stay in touch, and I didn't offer. But as he walked to his car, shoulders hunched against the wind, I thought of Edward, how he'd always hoped Michael would grow into decency. Maybe he finally had. Laura's news came a few days later. She stopped by my apartment, files tucked under one arm, a familiar energy in her step. I quit the firm, she said before I could even ask. I blinked. You what? I'm done fighting for people who think winning is a business plan. You've got the estate back, the assets reinstated, and frankly, you need someone who understands how to keep it all from circling the drain again. You're serious? Completely, she said, setting the files on the table. Whitmore Holdings is yours now, Claire. Let's make sure it stands for something better than what they turned it into. I looked at her. The woman who'd fought beside me, believed when I barely could. I don't even know where to start. She smiled. That's the best place to begin. Weeks passed. The noise faded. Reporters still called, of course. Documentary producers. Book agents. Every outlet desperate to bottle the story. Most of the time, I didn't answer. But sometimes I caught snippets of what they were saying. The quiet widow who won. The woman who brought down the Whitmore dynasty. They said it like it was triumph. But triumph wasn't what it felt like. One night, as Laura and I reviewed files at my kitchen table, she read another headline aloud and shook her head. You realize you're an icon now, right? I smiled faintly. Icons are for things that don't move anymore. She laughed softly, setting the papers aside. You could enjoy this, you know. You earned it. I stared out the window. the city lights reflecting against the glass like faint ghosts of everything that had been lost. I didn't win, I said finally. I just stopped losing. Laura studied me, her expression gentling. That's still something? Maybe, I said, but it doesn't feel finished. Outside, a siren wailed and faded into the distance. The city was alive again, indifferent to my small victory. And somewhere beneath the quiet hum of night, I felt it. That faint ache that never really left. The kind that reminds you peace isn't permanent. Laura reached across the table, her voice soft. What's next? I looked down at the brass key resting near my papers. Edward's key, still faintly warm in the lamplight. I don't know, I said, but I think he left me more than one door to open. The call came on a Sunday morning. I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it, the area code, the timing, tugged at me. When I picked up, the voice on the other end was rough, tired, almost unrecognizable. Claire, he said. It's Paul. For a moment I said nothing. I could hear the faint echo of traffic behind him, the hollow space of someone speaking from nowhere. I don't think you want to hear from me, I said finally. You're right, he replied, but you need to. I stood by the window, one hand gripping the frame. If this is an apology, it's not, he said quickly. Not yet. I'm calling because there's something left. Something Edward gave me to mail after his death. I felt my pulse quicken. Another document? A letter, Paul said. Addressed to Rachel and Michael. He wanted it sent a week after the will was executed. I didn't. I thought. His voice cracked, the sound of a man who'd run out of rationalizations. I thought it would make things worse, but after everything, after what they did to you, I couldn't keep it anymore. Why now? I asked. Because truth has a habit of surviving us, he said quietly. I've sent you a copy. Check your email. The line went dead. I found the message waiting. No subject line, no greeting, just an attached scan. The file opened slowly, as if the universe understood I wasn't ready for what waited. The letter began in Edward's careful, deliberate handwriting. To my children, Rachel and Michael, by the time you read this, what I feared most may already have happened. I wanted to believe love and legacy could coexist, but I see now they cannot. Claire has been my one constant truth, though I've done little to deserve her loyalty. I have tried to protect her. From you, from myself, from the inheritance that poisons everything it touches. I sank into the chair, the words blurring slightly as I read on. If I am gone, it means I failed to stop what was already in motion. But I have amended the estate again, privately, permanently. The manor will belong to her. Let it remind you that a house built on greed cannot last, but one tended with grace can outlive us all. My hand flew to my mouth. I reread it twice, tracing the ink where his pen had pressed too hard. He'd changed everything. The manor, the Whitmore estate, the crown jewel of his legacy, wasn't part of the trust anymore. It was mine. Laura came as soon as I called. She read the letter in silence, then exhaled slowly. He made sure you'd have something no one could take. The house alone is worth more than everything they fought over combined. I don't want the value, I said. I want the meaning. She nodded. Then maybe it's time you go claim it. By late afternoon, I was driving down Ridgeway Road, the long stretch of oaks arching overhead, their branches laced with fading gold. The manor rose at the end of the lane, familiar and strange all at once. Windows dark, shutters drawn, as if it had been holding its breath. I parked in the gravel circle and stepped out. The air was cool, sharp with the scent of wet leaves. Each step toward the front door felt like walking into a memory I hadn't dared to revisit. The lock turned easily. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been. The faint trace of lemon oil, the echo of footsteps long gone. The parlor still held its heavy chairs, all facing the fireplace where it had begun. I walked to the mantel and ran my fingers along the carved wood, the same spot where Paul had once stood reading Edward's will. Dust clung to my skin. "I think you knew," I whispered. "You knew they'd come for everything, and you left me the one thing they couldn't touch." Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, catching the edges of old picture frames, Edward's face among them, watching, steady as ever. I took a deep breath, feeling the silence settle around me. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Of him, of truth, of the peace that comes only after everything else has burned away. "This," I said softly, "was the envelope they never saw coming." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, rustling like distant applause. And for the first time, the house felt alive again, not as a monument to what had been lost, but as the last piece of what had finally been made right. The manor didn't stay silent for long. Within months, laughter and light filled its halls again, the kind of sound Edward would have called living proof. The legal restoration had been straightforward. The property was mine, uncontested, untouchable. But what I did next was never about ownership. It was about repair. We renamed it the Whitmore Foundation for Future Care, a scholarship program for children of nurses. My mother's profession? The life I'd come from before I ever knew marble staircases or legacy trusts. Edward used to say compassion was the only inheritance worth keeping. I decided to make it official. The first applicants arrived that spring. Shy, bright-eyed teenagers with folders clutched to their chests. Their essays spoke of late shifts, single parents, fluorescent hospital lights, and hope that refused to flicker. I read every one of them. Sometimes I'd walk the grounds before the meetings began, the oak branches overhead whispering in the wind, the air alive with the sound of possibility. The same path that once echoed with betrayal now carried footsteps towards something better. Michael came to the dedication ceremony unannounced. He kept to the back, helping the catering team carry tables, sleeves rolled up, face flushed from work. When I noticed him, he only nodded, a quiet acknowledgement, no words needed. Afterward, he approached as the last guests were leaving. "This is good," he said, glancing at the banners fluttering above the entryway. "Father would have liked it?" "I hope so," I said. He smiled faintly. "You made something beautiful out of the mess we left." "Maybe it had to break first," I replied. He nodded once more, then pressed a small donation envelope into my hand. "For the next scholarship. From both of us." "Both?" "Rachel," he said simply. She's not well. But she asked me to give this to you." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. We just stood there in the soft evening light until he turned to go, and that was enough. Later that night, the staff gathered in the restored dining room. Crystal glasses clinked softly, the scent of rosemary and candle wax filling the air. Laura lifted her glass with a grin. "To the woman who turned scandal into salvation, from outcast to queen." Laughter followed, warm, genuine. I shook my head, smiling. "Not a queen," I said, just back to myself. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "And what does that feel like?" I looked around, at the faces of students, at Michael's quiet sincerity across the room, at the portraits of Edward that no longer looked like ghosts. Like something I almost forgot existed, I said. Peace. 2 weeks later, I drove to the cemetery at the edge of town. The grounds were quiet, the air heavy with lilac. Edward's headstone stood beneath an old maple, its roots coiling deep into the earth like memory itself. I knelt and placed a small white envelope at its base. One final note, sealed but unaddressed. He'd written enough letters. It was my turn. You were right, I said softly, tracing the letters of his name. They showed me who they were. A pause. The breeze moved through the trees, a faint whisper in the branches. And who I was, I added. For a while I just sat there, listening to the wind, to the distant hum of life beyond the gates, to the sound of something finally finding its place. When I rose to leave, sunlight broke through the clouds, striking the brass key on my necklace. Edward's key, worn smooth from touch. It glinted once, catching the light, and then settled against my heart. The house, the legacy, the truth, all finally home. The first fundraiser was nothing like the ones Rachel used to host. No red carpets, no photographers angling for scandal. Just strings of warm lights draped across the terrace, the faint hum of jazz and the laughter of people who weren't pretending to care. The manor gleamed in the dusk, not opulent anymore, but open. The front doors stood wide, the scent of gardenia drifting through the entryway. Guests moved easily between rooms, admiring portraits that had been rehung, not of the Whitmores, but of nurses, doctors, and scholarship recipients. The walls, for once, were honest. I stood near the grand staircase, a glass of champagne in hand, watching it all unfold. The sound of conversation rolled through the parlor like soft music, rising and falling against the piano's quiet rhythm. Someone whispered near the entrance just loud enough for me to catch it. "That's her," a woman said. "The widow who turned betrayal into an empire." I almost laughed. Empire wasn't the word I would have used. But I didn't correct her. Let them say what they wanted. People needed stories. I'd simply given them one that ended differently than expected. Laura appeared beside me, wearing one of her rare dresses. Sleek black, simple, confident. She looked around, taking in the scene with obvious pride. "You realize this is poetic justice, right?" "Justice," I echoed. "Or symmetry?" "Semantics," she said, smiling. "You took the same house where they humiliated you and turned it into a symbol of everything they weren't capable of. Generosity, compassion, grace." I swirled the champagne slowly. "You make it sound like revenge, isn't it?" she asked. I looked around, at the students laughing on the steps, at the donors chatting beneath chandeliers once dimmed by guilt. The evening light filtered through the tall windows, painting everything in shades of gold. "Not the kind they'd recognize," I said. Laura tilted her head. "Do you ever think of it? Revenge?" I smiled, not bitterly, but softly, the way you smile when a lesson finally makes sense. "That's what this is," I said. "Done beautifully." She clinked her glass against mine. "To beautiful revenge, then." "To beginnings," I corrected. As the evening went on, the sun dipped low behind the oak trees, and the glow through the windows deepened, molten amber spilling across the parlor floor. I caught my reflection in the glass. Older, quieter, certain. For the first time, I didn't see the woman who'd lost everything. I saw the one who'd learned how to build something from the ashes. Michael was there too, working discreetly behind the bar, laughing with a student over spilled punch. I watched him for a moment, the ease in his movements. He didn't look haunted anymore. Maybe none of us did. The auction began just after sunset. Paintings, small sculptures, even Edward's old fountain pen, all sold in minutes. Every dollar went to the foundation. Every bid felt like a line rewritten, a wound closing. When the crowd finally began to thin, Laura found me again. "They'll be talking about this night for years," she said. "About you." "Let them," I said, "but not as a scandal, as a reminder." She smiled. "Of what?" "That the truth survives," I said, "and so do the people who live by it." Outside, the crickets had begun their slow, rhythmic chorus. The night air was cool, and the lights from the terrace flickered across the lawns like small constellations brought to earth. I set my glass down, walking toward the open doors. From here, I could see the parlor, the chairs facing the fireplace, the same ones that had once framed my humiliation. Now they framed laughter, hope, continuity. The manor wasn't heavy anymore. It breathed. The past had stopped echoing. I turned to Laura one last time, her face glowing in the candlelight. "They tried to erase me from the will," I said quietly. "But my envelope didn't just change everything." I paused, letting the moment settle, the air thick with the quiet hum of life moving forward. "It ended their story," I said, voice steady, "and began mine." The room behind me shimmered with gold, the light catching dust motes that looked, for a heartbeat, like sparks of something reborn. And as the night stretched on, laughter spilling out through the open doors, music rising toward the stars, I knew that peace, finally, had learned my name.